Justin Levine is a three-time Tony nominee this year for his contributions to the book, score, and orchestrations of The Outsiders, the musical on Broadway. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Justin, first and foremost, congratulations on the Tony nominations.
Thank you. Thank you so
How,
much.
how does it feel when you hear your name that morning, not once or twice, but three different times?
I was completely shocked. I really, I was with John and Zach from Jamestown Revival, and I, I was really just stunned. All three of us were screaming and in our PJs and running around like, you know, maniacs. It was really very, very, it was it was great to get to experience that together.
Yeah, I have to imagine. And you've done so many projects off Broadway. You've done shows on Broadway before. You've won a Tony before. What is so unique about The Outsiders compared to everything you've done? And what was most challenging about this show versus all the other work that you've done in the past?
Well, I guess what's so unique about The Outsiders for me is also what I think made it the most challenging and therefore rewarding, which was that it was the most collaborative process I've ever been a part of. And you have all these different folks with different backgrounds and different experiences. And, but by the same token, or at the same time, we were able to uh, work together. Both, sometimes it felt like a relay race where we would be like, okay, now you have it, now you have it, and we would keep moving it down the field. But then a lot of times it also felt a bit like a Ouija board where all of our hands were on it and it's just moving and we're all collectively both moving and following one another in one direction.
Yeah, there are so many wonderful collaborators on this. And we'll talk about them as we talk about each of these
Yeah.
different roles and hats that you have in this musical. Let's start with the book. The book is by Adam Rapp with contributions by you. I just wanted to ask, like, how much of Adam's work did you know prior to working with him on this? And how did you help him kind of shepherd? This, I believe, is the first time he's written a book for a musical before. He's obviously a very experienced playwright. So how did you help him kind of navigate the process of doing a book musical for the first time?
Well, the answer to your first question is that I was very familiar with Adam's work, and I was a huge fan of his work and of his voice. And so, from the very beginning of the process, um, it was important for me that my participation wouldn't in any way dilute Adam's distinct voice, because I also felt like the way it communicated uh, the story was very much speaking the same language as the sound that Jamestown Revival and myself were creating. And so, really, it was more about form versus content. And inevitably, one affects the other, typically form first. But so yeah, a lot of it was just about figuring out ways with Adam and with Jamestown how to take um, the purest parts of their creative expressions and mine for that matter, and how to put them into um, the form of a musical. And I think what's fun about that, and something that excites me about musicals, is that while we often attempt to sort of put these dogmatic parameters around what a musical is, I think for any example of a rule that's been etched into the tablets, you can find many exceptions. And so it was exciting to figure that out with them. So it wasn't so much just about my role on the show wasn't teaching about the form. That happened at times when it was necessary, but it was also to me it was more like whenever you start any project, particularly when you're collaborating, you're kind of you're exploring something. You're trying to find something. And so I feel like we were all trying to find that together, and I'm somebody who's not afraid of differing sensibilities, and I don't think Adam, John, or Zach are like that either. And furthermore, I'll say Danya Tamor, our director, is definitely not. And so that was exciting to be able to do that together.
Yeah, let's talk about one facet of the book project, which I think must have been really unique in that this is based on a really beloved novel, and also the film adaptation as well, which is so well known. Structurally, was there anything that was, particularly challenging, or, that you and Adam had to really work on figuring out what's the best way to adapt something that's so well known into an entirely new format, especially since it's such a narrative piece, the novel anyway?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was really challenging for that reason. And, speaking of sort of like our different sensibilities and backgrounds, Adam is also a novelist. And so, and has written young adult novels. And so it was really helpful to have his perspective at that point because he could also identify certain literary devices and structural devices that Susie Hinton was employing. And also because he is a theater maker, then we were able to always speak the same language and figure out. So, for example, a first person narrative novel, you're living inside the head of the person, right? And so in the novel, you're inside of Ponyboy's head, and you're able to uh, really stay on one idea for pages. You can meditate on something, and only 2 seconds have passed in the world, in the timeline, right? And so something that we often had to do was figure out when was it important and helpful for Ponyboy to be able to speak to us directly. When is it helpful for it to be something that gives us a chance to really build the sort of detail out in your mind's eye versus a quick aside, which gets you to a place that allows the song to do that. So I think there were a number of instances where that was challenging. I think one of them was in Act Two when Ponyboy is suddenly thrust into a situation where he is isolated from the rest of his world, and so yeah, I think it also kind of reminds me of some of the work that we had to do on Moulin Rouge, which is you take a very distinct cinematic style or just formal uh, structure, and you don't get to use most of those tools. So we just had to find other ways to create the stage equivalent of that.
Yeah, yeah, I think it came out so well in this production. I know that you and Danya and Jamestown and Adam and the cast all got to go to Tulsa before Broadway rehearsals. Um, I just wanted to ask you, what about that experience really influenced the instrumentation that you use on the score and in your orchestrations? Like, did actually going to the location where this is set and kind of immersing yourself in that culture of that place, influence the musicality of the piece?
Well, I've been to Tulsa a few times, and I, am a big fan of Leon Russell, who's probably the most famous, popular artist to have come out of Tulsa, certainly one of them. And John and Zach and and Brody spent some time at the Church Studio, which was Leon Russell's home studio there. And so there is something that we think of as the Tulsa sound, and it definitely had an influence. I think on zooming out a bit, the thing that was really important to us, both given John and Zach's musical background and my musical background, and Adam's musical background for that matter as well, is that it's American music, which is rooted in world music. So there are elements of folk from various places, bluegrass, soul music. There are all sorts of different things we're pulling from, because I think what's so incredible about Susie's book is that it's about a specific time and a specific place, and yet it's so universal. And that for myself, growing up on Long Island, I found it so relatable, and that it didn't feel like an alien world to me. And so I think because yes, music can be broken up into genres, but also it's so cross-cultural and pulls from so many different places that the sound of Tulsa is, or rather the Tulsa sound versus the sound of Tulsa for us, we're inevitably going to be two different things. But that's why our show does feature a lot of eclectic sounds. You have rock and roll, you have rockabilly, you have, like I said, soul, folk, some elements of gospel. And I think that was really important to us, because I think it's a way to not make it feel like this thing is only for a certain um, group of people, or a certain people with a certain sensibility.
Yeah, it's amazing how beautifully it comes together into a cohesive whole. And there's so many songs I'd love to ask you about, but we only have time for a few. But I do want to start with Great Expectations, which to me is one of my favorite new songs of the entire Broadway season. It's just absolutely beautiful. And that kind of climax is just so profound and moving in the theater. It gives people chills on the cast album. It's so beautiful as well. What was the approach to that moment? I mean, it's such a soaring, you have all those voices of the ensemble who are just so perfect, and the orchestrations are kind of soaring and beautiful. What was the approach to getting that moment right? Because I feel like it's one of the moments early on in the show that just leaps off the stage.
Well, thank you. I think the idea was um, purely, narrative driven, in the sense that this is a moment. It's really, aside from the opening, it's the first moment that we get a moment alone again with Pony Boy, and a lot has happened, right? So he gets beaten up. He effectively gets brought in more kind of officially, and sort of you know uh, greased up and crowned as a greaser, and brought into the fold a bit more. It's sort of an initiation process. And we also see a peek into his home life. We learn a bit about what he's struggling with internally as it relates to his parents' death. And so we have a scene where he's talking to his older brother, Soda Pop, and we really wanted to allow that to have the stillness of going to bed, and of those sort of the nagging thoughts that keep us awake, and to then start the song as small as possible to reflect that. And then, little by little, as he starts to piece his world together, you suddenly, and this is also partly through Danya's beautiful staging of this number, is through his flashlight, suddenly it alights on all of these people in his life. And so, to me, the song is sort of utilizes this cumulative trajectory in order to then earn what is purely an internal thing that he's feeling, but externalizing it through that big chorus. And because he's enlisting everybody and he's conjuring them up, um, that allows us to then bring the entire ensemble into that moment. Not to mention, Brody Grant's incredible voice.
Yeah, let's talk about one other song that I think has a similar approach, but to a different kind of end, which is Stay Gold, the penultimate
Mhm.
song in the show, which is so, again, a beautiful number. And I just wanted to really ask you about the restraint that Jamestown and you brought to that, in terms of it's very acoustic, very stripped down, those beautiful harmonies between Sky and Brody, just a lovely number. And just like I said, what was the idea behind, there's so much that we could add in terms of instrumentation to this, but let's really be restrained in this moment and just let those two voices and a very simple accompaniment, kind of carry the day.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a conscious choice, but also a lot of those choices, if not all of them, reveal themselves, I think, in a way, and that when you, particularly when it's in a musical, the moment tells you what it demands. And the notion that Brody, rather Ponyboy and Johnny, played by Sky, would be doing anything other than what they're doing in that moment and connecting in that moment, in that very tender way, just didn't feel right to us. And there are other examples throughout the show where we tried sort of different dynamic levels or different types of orchestration, but also from a musical perspective, you know, the music, the sort of umbrella term for the sort of the catch-all for all of these different styles is Americana. And when you think about Americana, um, it's often about how little there is there. Rather, it's more minimal. It's not maximalism, and that you know people often say that in a musical you sing when your emotions are too great that you can't help but sing, and I always say that that is indeed one thing that music can do, but that music really is a metaphor, and so it has to uh, sincerely represent the moment itself, and that's how I think we landed there. It also just always felt from the beginning that that song would, and that song was in a couple of different places initially, but even so, I think it's part of the song's DNA.
Yeah. As I said earlier, Justin, so many wonderful songs in the score that we could talk about and so many great book scenes. I just wanted to ask you before I let you go, do you have a favorite song personally? Is there a favorite book scene that you're particularly proud of? What of these, of the many different things that you've contributed to this show, really stand out in your memory as moments you're particularly proud of?
It's really hard to choose, to be honest. I think one of the things I love about our show is sort of going back to the top of our conversation, that you see everybody's, you know, soul as part of the DNA of the show, but also the show feels like one collective voice. And so I guess the way I would answer it is just to think of a couple of moments that where I recognize that in some of my collaborators and within our collaboration. One for me would be a monologue that Dallas Winston has in Act Two, where he has come to find Pony and Johnny, and he talks about uh, how you deal with trouble. And I think it's some of my favorite language that Adam has written. And there are, for me also, it's about the production itself, which really is just a manifestation of Danya Taymor's vision alongside the Kuberman brothers, and that there are so many moments of the show where there is there are no words and you are just experiencing the world of it. And so um, I think, those are some of my favorite parts. I mean, obviously the Rumble is breathtaking, and there are so many parts of it that still take my breath away. But I think also I love the moments where the show goes from as big as it possibly can get to as small, and how we uh, really manage. Certainly, even to this day, as an audience member, when I watch it, I feel like I go on that ride with them. But as far as music goes, that's a tough one, because it's sort of, I think on any show I work on, it roves around, it moves. And there have been times where Death's at My Door is my favorite song. There are times when it's Stay Gold. There are times when it's Tulsa 67. Um, but I think also it's hard to look at it without reflecting on the collaboration and the process of it, and where John and Zach and I were when we had a breakthrough on a song. And sometimes it was in a cool shotgun house in Austin, Texas, and then other times it was at Ripley Greer, and just all the different um, places. And a lot of times Adam was there, and we're working together and create. I think that's why it's sometimes hard to identify a single spot.
Yeah, well, so well said, and so many terrific moments that you pulled out. Justin, congratulations on The Outsiders. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank you.